You know that moment when your entire world collapses in the span of a single sentence? When someone you trust completely says something so casual, so offhand, that it destroys everything you thought you knew about your life. I'm about to tell you about the day that happened to me 2 weeks before what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My name is Sarah, and I need to tell you this story because I'm still questioning everything. Did I make the right choice? Was I too harsh? Or did I dodge the biggest bullet of my life? By the end of this, maybe you can help me figure it out. It started 5 years ago when I met Jake at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. I was 23, fresh out of graduate school, and he was this charming, down-to-earth guy who made me laugh until my sides hurt. He wasn't wealthy like the men my father always pushed toward me. Jake was a teacher, passionate about his work, genuine in a way that made me feel like I could finally breathe around someone. You see, I come from money. Serious money. My father, Richard, is one of the most successful divorce attorneys in the state. He's built an empire on broken marriages, and somewhere along the way, he became obsessed with protecting wealth, especially mine. Growing up, every conversation about relationships came with warnings about gold diggers, prenups, and people who would try to take advantage of M. But Jake felt different. He never asked about my family's wealth. When we went out, he insisted on paying for our modest dates. He drove an old Honda Civic and lived in a tiny apartment, but he was proud of what he'd built for himself. For the first time in my life, I felt loved for who I was, not what I had. 3 years into our relationship, Jake proposed during a trip to Santorini. Picture this. We're watching the sunset from our small hotel balcony, the sky painted in these impossible shades of orange and pink, and he gets down on one knee with this simple, beautiful ring. Not the massive diamond my father would have chosen, but something Jake had saved for months to buy. Something that represented us, not my family's expectations. I said yes without hesitation. This was my person. This was my future. Planning the wedding should have been pure joy, but my father immediately inserted himself into every decision. He offered to pay for the reception, the flowers, the photographer. I should have seen it as the controlling move it was, but I was so caught up in wedding bliss that I let it happen. Jake seemed uncomfortable with my father's generosity, but I assured him it was just Dad's way of showing love. Looking back, I can see how naive I was. My father and Jake had always maintained a polite but distant relationship. Dad would make subtle comments about Jake's salary, his career prospects, his family background. Nothing overtly cruel, just these little needles disguised as fatherly concern. Jake would tense up whenever Dad was around, but he never complained. He said he understood that my father was just protective. God, how wrong we both were. The wedding was planned for a Saturday in June. We'd booked this beautiful venue overlooking the river, invited 200 guests, and I'd found the perfect dress. Everything was falling into place. 2 weeks before the big day, I was practically floating on air. That Tuesday, Dad asked me to lunch to go over some final guest list details. Nothing unusual there. We met at his favorite restaurant, this upscale place where he always ordered the same Caesar salad and talked business. I was scrolling through my phone, confirming +1s and dietary restrictions, when he said it. At least now I know he signed the prenup. Money well spent. I stopped mid-bite, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My father continued cutting his salad as if he'd just commented on the weather, but something in my chest began to crack. "What did you just say?" I asked, setting down my fork with trembling hands. He looked up, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe even regret. But then his lawyer mask slipped back into place. "Nothing important, sweetheart. Just some legal paperwork." But I wasn't backing down. 5 years with Jake had taught me to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming that something was terribly wrong. "Dad, what prenup?" Jake and I never discussed a prenup. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. My father set down his own fork and leaned back in his chair, studying me with those calculating eyes that had intimidated countless opposing attorneys. "Sarah, I was trying to protect you. You know how these things go. I've seen too many marriages end badly, too many people taken advantage of. My blood was ice in my veins." "What did you do?" He sighed, like I was being unreasonable. I approached Jake a few months ago with a prenuptial agreement. Something fair but protective. He signed it. I may have offered him some financial incentive to smooth things over. The restaurant seemed to spin around me. You offered him money? You bribed my fiancé to sign a legal document behind my back. I prefer to think of it as ensuring everyone's interests were protected. I don't remember leaving the restaurant. I don't remember driving home. All I remember is the white-hot rage coursing through my body and the single thought pounding in my head. Jake took money from my father and never told me. When I walked into our shared apartment that evening, Jake was grading papers at our kitchen table, looking so beautifully normal that I almost lost my nerve. He looked up with that smile I'd fallen in love with, but it felt like a stranger's face. Hey babe, how was lunch with your dad? Interesting, I said, setting my purse down with deliberate calm. He mentioned something about a prenup. The change in Jake's expression was immediate and devastating. The color drained from his face, and his pen slipped from his fingers. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the kitchen that had been our sanctuary. Sarah, I can explain. Can you? Because I'm really struggling to understand how my fiancé signed a legal document about our marriage without mentioning it to me. He stood up slowly, his hands raised like he was approaching a frightened animal. Your father came to me 3 months ago. He said he wanted to discuss our future, man to man. I thought it was going to be some kind of blessing conversation, you know. Go on. He showed up at my school after work one day. Took me to dinner at this expensive place I could never afford. Started talking about how much he loved you, how he wanted to make sure you were always taken care of. Then he pulled out these papers. Jake ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was stressed. It used to comfort me. Now it just made me angry. He said it was a standard prenup, just protecting what you'd built before we met. He said couples in your financial situation always did this, that it was normal. Then he mentioned that there could be some compensation for my cooperation, to help with wedding expenses, or maybe a down payment on a house. How much? Sarah! How much, Jake? His voice was barely a whisper. $50,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $50,000. More than Jake made in a year. More than enough to tempt a struggling teacher who'd been worrying about how to afford our future. And you took it. I told myself I was doing it for us. Your father made it sound like you'd be hurt if you knew he didn't trust me. He said this way, everyone could relax and focus on the wedding. So you decided what was best for me without asking me. I was going to tell you. After the honeymoon, when things settled down. I never meant for it to be permanent secret. But I was already shaking my head. You don't get it, do you? It's not about the prenup itself. It's about the fact that you and my father made a decision about my life, my marriage, my future, and I wasn't even in the room. Sarah, please. You took $50,000, Jake. You took money from my father to sign away your rights to my assets, and you never said a word. What does that make you? The question hung between us like a blade. Jake's face crumpled, and I saw the exact moment he realized what he'd done, what he'd become in my eyes. It makes me someone who got scared and made a terrible mistake. It makes you someone who can be bought. I said it quietly, but the words landed like a gunshot. Jake flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not fair, Sarah. You don't know what it's like to have your future father-in-law question whether you're good enough for his daughter. To sit across from someone who could destroy your career with a phone call and try to prove you're worthy. So instead of talking to me about it, you took his money and hoped I'd never find out. I was trying to protect you from having to choose between us. By making the choice for me, we stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by the life we built together, and I felt it all crumbling. The photos on the refrigerator from our trips together. The coffee mugs we bought from that little shop in Vancouver. The engagement ring on my finger that suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I can't marry you, I said. The words came out steadier than I felt. Jake's face went completely white. Sarah, no. Please. We can fix this. I'll give the money back. We can tear up the prenup. We can start over. Can we? Because every time I look at you now, I'm going to wonder what else you're hiding from me. Every time you make a decision about our future, I'm going to question whether you're really thinking about what's best for us or what's best for your bank account. You know that's not who I am. Do I? Because the Jake I thought I knew would have come home that night 3 months ago and said, Honey, your father approached me with this crazy prenup thing. What do you think we should do? The Jake I thought I knew wouldn't have taken $50,000 and hidden it from his fiancé. Jake was crying now, these quiet tears that used to break my heart. Now they just made me feel empty. I love you, Sarah. I love you more than anything in this world. I know I screwed up, but please don't throw away 5 years because I made one terrible decision. It's not one decision, Jake. It's a pattern. It's the fact that when things got complicated, you chose the easy way out instead of talking to me. It's the fact that you let my father manipulate both of us instead of standing up for our relationship. I pulled off my engagement ring and set it on the counter between us. It made a tiny sound as it hit the marble, but in the silence of our dying relationship, it sounded like a gunshot. I need you to leave. Sarah! Please, just go. He gathered his things with the careful movements of someone in shock. At the door, he turned back one more time. I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. Everything I did because I love you. I know, I said. That's what makes this so heartbreaking. After he left, I called the wedding venue and canceled everything. The reception, the flowers, the photographer, the band. Each phone call was a small death, another piece of the future I'd imagined dissolving into nothing. The hardest call was to my maid of honor, my best friend Emma, who'd been planning her speech for weeks. I'm so sorry, she said when I finished explaining. What can I do? Nothing. There's nothing anyone can do. Do you think you're making the right choice? It was the question everyone would ask me over the next few weeks, and I never had a good answer. Was I making the right choice? Or was I letting my father's manipulation destroy the best relationship I'd ever had? I don't know, I admitted, but I know I can't marry someone I don't trust. The next few days were a blur of canceled vendors and return gifts. My mother thought I was overreacting. My friends were split down the middle. Some said I was brave for standing up for myself. Others thought I was throwing away true love over a technicality. But it wasn't a technicality. It was about respect. It was about partnership. It was about the fundamental question of whether the person you're marrying sees you as an equal or as someone who needs to be managed. Jake called and texted constantly. He sent flowers, letters, even showed up at my office once before security escorted him out. He was devastated, genuinely remorseful, and probably more in love with me than ever. But love wasn't enough anymore. The worst part, my father was thrilled. He tried to hide it, of course. He played the concerned dad, worried about my heartbreak. But I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He'd won. He'd successfully sabotaged my relationship with Jake, and he'd done it in a way that made me the villain. I never wanted this to happen, he told me over dinner a week after I'd called off the wedding. I was just trying to protect you. No, I said, finally finding my voice. You were trying to control me. You've been trying to control every aspect of my life since I was born, and when you met someone who made me genuinely happy, you couldn't stand it. Jake wasn't right for you, Sarah. You see that now, don't you? Jake loved me. He made me laugh. He supported my dreams. He was kind and honest, and he took $50,000 to sign a legal document behind your back. The words hit their mark because they were true. Whatever my father's motivations, Jake had still made that choice. He'd still looked at that check and decided his discomfort was more important than our partnership. You orchestrated this, I said. You set him up to fail. I gave him a choice. He made it. You're a lawyer, Dad. You know exactly how to manipulate people into doing what you want. You found his weakness and exploited it. I found out who he really was. No, you found out who he could become under pressure. There's a difference. But was there? That was the question that kept me awake at night. Had my father simply revealed Jake's true character, or had he created a situation designed to bring out the worst in him? The prenup itself was brutal when I finally read it. It wasn't the fair, protective document my father had described. It essentially cut Jake out of everything. Any assets I acquired during the marriage, any growth in my trust fund, any inheritance from my family, Jake would have no claim to any of it. If we divorced, he'd walk away with nothing but what he'd brought into the marriage. It wasn't a partnership agreement. It was a master-servant contract. No wonder Jake had hesitated. No wonder he felt like he needed that $50,000 as insurance. My father had essentially told him, Sign this document that ensures you'll never be an equal partner in this marriage, and I'll pay you for the privilege." When I confronted my father about the terms, he was unapologetic. "Divorce statistics don't lie, Sarah. 50% of marriages end. I wasn't going to let you be another cautionary tale. So instead, you made sure I'd never get married at all. You'll find someone better. Someone who doesn't need to be bought." "Will I? Because you'll put every man I date through the same test, won't you? You'll find their price and use it against them." He didn't deny it. That's when I realized the full scope of what had happened. This wasn't just about Jake. This was about my father's need to control every aspect of my life, to ensure that no one would ever be more important to me than him and his money. I moved out of my family-funded apartment and got my own place. I declined my father's offers to pay off my student loans or help with a down payment on a house. For the first time in my life, I was truly independent, and it was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Jake stopped calling after about a month. I heard through mutual friends that he'd given the $50,000 to charity and taken a job teaching at a school in another state. Part of me was proud of him for that gesture. Part of me wondered if it was too little, too late. I started therapy to work through the betrayal and to understand why I'd let my father manipulate my relationships for so long. My therapist helped me see that I'd been trained from childhood to equate love with financial security, to believe that my worth was tied to my family's wealth. "Your father's greatest fear," she told me, "isn't that someone will take advantage of you financially. It's that someone will love you enough to make his money irrelevant." That hit me like a lightning bolt. My father wasn't protecting me from gold diggers. He was protecting himself from irrelevance. 6 months after the canceled wedding, I ran into Jake at a bookstore. He looked good, thinner, maybe a little tired, but peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. We talked for an hour over coffee, really talked, maybe for the first time since this whole mess began. "I've had a lot of time to think," he said, "about what happened, about the choices I made. And I was wrong. Not just about taking the money, but about the whole situation. I let your father intimidate me into believing that his approval mattered more than your trust." "Why?" Jake stared into his coffee cup for a long moment. "Because I was scared. Scared that I wasn't good enough for you. Scared that your family would always see me as an outsider. Scared that eventually you'd realize you could do better. So you decided to prove them right." "Yeah, I guess I did." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching people browse the bookshelves around us. It felt like closure, or maybe just clarity. "Do you think we could have made it work?" I asked. "If this hadn't happened? I don't know. Maybe. But probably not if I never learned to stand up to your father. And you never learned to set boundaries with him." He was right. Even if we'd gotten married, my father would have found other ways to interfere, other pressure points to exploit. The prenup situation was just the beginning. "I hear you moved to Seattle," I said. "Yeah. Fresh start. I'm teaching at an inner-city school. The kids are tough, but they're amazing. I feel like I'm actually making a difference." "I'm glad. What about you? Are you happy?" It was such a simple question, but I had to think about it. Was I happy? I was independent for the first time in my life. I'd started my own nonprofit organization, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage to try. I was dating, though nothing serious yet. I was learning to trust my own judgment instead of relying on my father's opinions or money. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. We hugged goodbye, and I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Not for how things had ended, but for what I'd learned about myself in the process. The hardest part of the whole experience wasn't losing Jake. It was realizing that my father, the man who was supposed to love and protect me unconditionally, had been sabotaging my happiness for years. Every relationship that had ended badly, every man who'd suddenly lost interest, how many of them had been subjected to my father's tests. I confronted him about it during what would be our last dinner together for a very long time. "How many?" I asked. "How many men have you paid off over the years?" "Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about." "Michael from college. David from grad school. The guy I met at Emma's wedding. How many of them did you approach with your little tests?" His silence was all the answer I needed. "You've been controlling my love life since I was 18. I've been protecting you." "No, Dad. You've been protecting yourself. You've been so afraid of losing control over me that you've made sure I'd never find anyone worth losing control for. Everything I did was because I love you. This isn't love. This is ownership. And I'm done being owned. I stood up from the table at his expensive restaurant, the same one where he'd accidentally revealed his manipulation, and walked away from him. Not just physically, but emotionally, financially, completely. It's been 2 years now since I called off my wedding. I still don't know if I made the right choice. Some days I think I was strong and principled. Other days I wonder if I threw away my one chance at real love because I was too proud to forgive a mistake. But here's what I do know. I'm no longer afraid of my father's disapproval. I'm no longer dependent on his money or his opinion of my choices. I've learned to trust myself, to set boundaries, to recognize manipulation when I see it. I also know that trust, once broken, is incredibly hard to rebuild. Jake's betrayal wasn't just about the money or the prenup. It was about his willingness to let someone else make decisions about our relationship without including me in the conversation. Would I handle things differently if I could go back? Maybe. Maybe I would have suggested couples counseling, given us both time to work through the trust issues. Maybe I would have recognized that we were both victims of my father's manipulation and tried to build something stronger together. Or maybe I would have made the same choice because some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. I've started dating again, carefully and with clear boundaries. I tell potential partners about my family's situation up front. I explain that my father is controlling and manipulative, that he might try to interfere in our relationship, and that I need someone strong enough to stand up to that pressure. It's a conversation that has scared off more than one man, and I'm okay with that. I'd rather be alone than with someone who can be bought or intimidated into betraying my trust. The hardest part is that I still love Jake. Not the way I used to, not with that all-consuming passion that made me believe we could conquer anything together. But I love the memory of who we were before my father got between us. I love the man who made me laugh, who supported my dreams, who proposed to me with a ring he'd saved months to buy. I also understand now that love isn't always enough. Love without trust is like a house without a foundation. It might stand for a while, but eventually it will collapse. My father reached out recently, probably realizing that his control tactics had backfired spectacularly. He's alone now, surrounded by his money and his successful law practice, but without the daughter he claimed to be protecting. He sent a letter apologizing, saying he'd been wrong, that he missed me. But apologies without changed behavior are just words, and I've heard too many of his words over the years. Maybe someday I'll be ready to have a relationship with him again, but it will have to be on my terms, with clear boundaries and consequences for his manipulation. As for Jake, I hope he's happy. I hope he found someone who loves him the way he deserves to be loved, someone whose father doesn't try to buy him off or test his character. I hope he learned from our experience and chose someone who values his integrity over his bank account. And I hope that if he ever finds himself in a similar situation again, he'll remember what we lost and choose differently. The truth is, I may have lost my fiancé and my relationship with my father, but I gained something more valuable myself. I know who I am now, separate from my family's expectations and money. I know what I will and won't tolerate in a relationship. I know that I'm strong enough to walk away from situations that don't serve me, even when walking away breaks my heart. Some people think I was too harsh, that I should have forgiven Jake and worked through our problems together. Others think I dodged a bullet, that a man who could be bought once could be bought again. But here's the question I want to leave you with, the one I'm still wrestling with 2 years later. When someone you love betrays your trust in service of what they believe is a greater good, can that betrayal ever truly be forgiven? When the two most important men in your life make decisions about your future without including you, what does that say about how they see you? Was I right to end my engagement, or did I let pride and hurt feelings destroy something beautiful that could have been repaired? I honestly don't know, but I do know that I'd rather be alone and respected than married and handled like a business transaction. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have forgiven the betrayal and worked to rebuild trust, or would you have walked away like I did? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between love and self-respect, please subscribe for more real stories about the complicated choices we all have to make in life. Because sometimes the hardest part of loving someone isn't deciding to stay, It's knowing when to let go.